Hello, everyone. This is Robert McLain from Okinawa. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Korean Taekwondo history and development. I don't have any images really to provide today. I'll provide some fun backgrounds for you to look at, but really, this is the opportunity to listen to the material today and just drive, kick back, don't worry about what's on the screen, and just listen to what's discussed today. So I hope you enjoy it. Here we go. So you may or may not know that it's not a coincidence that many of the early forms, often called hyung, or my Okinawan karate friends call them kata, a lot of the early ones in Taekwondo were created by Koreans that had studied karate either during the wartime, World War II time, as they were allowed to train at various schools in Japan, or they were the generation that trained in what was taught in Korea by those students that had studied karate in Japan. So the original schools, called Kwan, they were mostly teaching karate that they had learned abroad in Japan. So they came back, opened up their Kwan. They were teaching martial art because after the wartime, it was not a nice place. You had to kind of defend yourself. So people wanted to learn how to block, how to punch, how to kick, how to protect themselves, because they could not rely on police or MPs, things like that, to do it for them. So they had to learn something to protect themselves. So many enrolled in these civilian gyms called Kwan, and they were mostly really just karate schools. And so that's what they were learning. One exception to that was a school called the Kwonbup-bu that was started by Master Hyung, who was a verified student and representative of Toyama Kanken from the Shudokan in Tokyo. So you can find, recently there was a copy of Toyama's book published way back in, it was either the 40s or 50s. I'll have to take a look again, but I mean, there's several versions that have been published, but recently there's a fully translated copy out. You can find it. And Hyun is one of two Koreans listed in there as Shihan under Toyama and his representative in Korea. So he studied, this is Hyun, he studied karate under Toyama. But before that, he had grown up in Changchun area of China. Was a Korean community there. People had fled the Japanese occupation, moved there. And he studied under a Mongolian instructor studying Chunfa, or Korea, they call it Kwonbup. So it just means fist method, but it was some type of, I guess what most commonly people know as Kung Fu. So he came back, Hyun came back, he opened his school called Kwonbup-bu, and he taught both karate from Toyama Kanken and then the Chunfa he had studied in China. So the early students there were studying karate and Chunfa. In fact, there's the following is a list of the kata, or forms, hyung, that they practiced during that time. And you can see that there's a really large list of karate forms there. And then you have the Chunfa next to it. Some of the Chunfa forms were two-person forms, meaning you learn an offensive part of it, the form, learn that. Then separately, you learn a defensive part of the form. And then you can get together with a partner and you can actually perform the form, both two people doing the form, one defensive side, one offensive side. So you can see on this chart that the list of karate forms that were taught at the Kwonbup-bu, and so students learned both. The Korean names for the forms are here. If you ever contact me outside, I can tell you the Japanese and the Okinawan names for them. But the karate forms are still being practiced in Japan and karate today. Unfortunately, the Chonfa, few instructors around the world still know them, and we'll get to the reason for that real soon. There was an interest in creating a unique martial arts identity for Korea. You have to understand, during the Japanese occupation of Korea, 1910 to 1945, Koreans were not allowed to practice striking arts like karate. So even the arts that are what could be considered fighting art before the Japanese occupation, like taekyon. People talk about taekyon. Taekyon was kind of a game. It was a game during the Dano festival. A couple young guys that play the music, they would do like rhythmic kind of dancing, and then the other one would try to kick them or sweep and take them to the ground. And then the winner would get like a prize hog or something like that. That was kind of the competition. And during that time, it was seen as fighting was lower class type of thing. So it kind of fell out of favor. So there was not a lot of martial art being practiced, just taekyon for fun, for game, which, of course, the movements could be used for fighting too. But it was already kind of on the decline when the Japanese invaded. So not much martial art to be preserved anyway. Song-duk-hee, he's seen as a national treasure preserving taekyon. He was a neighbor of my teacher, Grandmaster Kim Pyung-soo. And so they talked about it. And so we got a lot of firsthand information from Song-duk-hee about what it was like before the occupation and what is taekyon and what he remembered and things like that. So after Korean wartime, they wanted to make their own national identity for martial arts. So that's when they started coming up with the idea of Taekwondo. And there's lots of stories about how the name was coined. I don't want to get into that, but around that time, they started creating new kata, new hyung, new form requirements. There was Choi Hong-hee in his effort with creating the new forms and giving them names related to something in Korean history, a patriot, things like that. And then with his position in the army in the late 1950s, early 60s, he started promoting his school, his system. His senior student or him or whoever developed those kata, those new Taekwondo kata, you'll see them now today in the International Taekwondo Federation. That's what they use. They resemble karate a lot because that was their base of knowledge when they created them. They were karate students. So if you look at those, you can see why, and you understand the history, you can understand why they resemble karate katas, because, well, that was their base of knowledge. So that's what they used to create them. And then you get into the 1960s and there was lots of things going on. And so they separately, Korean government wanted to create same type of national martial arts identity and eventually get Korea into the Olympics with its own game, kind of like Japan did with judo. They wanted to get something in there, but martial arts not a game. It's it can hurt people, so they had to change it a little bit. And they also wanted to create a system to rank students from the various Kwan, because the Kwan might be doing similar karate forms, except for the Changmoo-kwan, they're also doing Chonfa. But they wanted a standardization so they could effectively rank black belts and under black belt level students amongst all the Kwan, the standard. So that's, later in the 1960s, they created the new forms for black belt grading in the 60s. Around 1966, 67, they created what a lot of students now know as like Koryo, named after the Koryo dynasty from 918 to 1392 AD. There was the first version of Koryo created then the form Taebek, and then Jite, Shipjin, Bakje, things like that. They created it so they can have a standard way to judge black belt grade holders from the various Kwan, instead of there being, fighting between the Kwan, who is better and things, like that. My form's better. So they try to make a standard. Then they also made GUP or Q grade level forms called Pogwe or Pogwe. They made 8 of those for grading. And that's what they created to standardize between the various Kwan. So they have Pogwe 1 through 8. Then they have the Udancha, the black belt forms, for standardization. And so at the same time they did this, they were saying, well, you no longer can practice the old form, the old requirements. We're now standardizing under the Taekwondo. This was at the time, it was like Korea Tangsoo-do Association became the Korean Taekwondo Association. Then early 1970s became World Taekwondo Federation, and I haven't followed it because I'm not part of it, but I believe it's now called World Taekwondo. I might be wrong on that, but I think the name changed again. But so I apologize if that's wrong. But going back to the early 70s, this is what it was called at that time. And so the same thing happened with the Pogwe forms, and then Koryo and Jite and Bakje and Shipjin, and they were created by Koreans that studied either karate or a combination of karate and chonfa. So that's why there's no mistaking, the link between karate and early Taekwondo. Now, when I look at Taekwondo now, they have the like Taeguk forms now as the standard for. They got rid of the Pogwe form since 1972. They made a new version of Koryo, the Koryo that now it like turned to one side. It's like a pseudo maki, like knife hand block, and then double side kick, low high. That's the new version. That's the version they created in 1973 or 4 to replace the original Koryo that they introduced in 1967. But you can still find schools today practicing December 1967 clinic Koryo. If you look at the forms list from, let's say, a school claims at Changmoo-kwan, and they say, okay, we teach the Kihon Hyung, Kihon Kata 1, 2, and 3, Pyongan or Pinan 1 through 5, maybe Pasai Te, or something like that. Well, that's kind of a decimated version of what was from Changmoo-kwan. There are a lot of karate schools that still teach those type of forms, but that's only a decimated version of what was at Changmoo-kwan or Kongdo-kwan. It's 8 forms out of however many are from the karate lineage, and then no chonfa and no bongso, no staff form. So you can use your knowledge from this podcast as kind of a foundation to kind of weed out who is really legitimately from original Changmoo-kwan or Sangmoo-kwan. In our case, I'm demonstrating Changmoo-kwan in this case. And then who's really a Taekwondo school, just World Taekwondo or ITF, something like that. So, like I say, there's nothing wrong with being World Taekwondo or ITF. It's just that you got to accurately represent what you're teaching. Don't use some name that has no relation to what you're teaching. Thank you for listening, everyone. This has been Robert McLain from Okinawa. I apologize I didn't have any instruction techniques to teach this time. I wanted to discuss a little bit history, which I wanted to share some of the history out there so the accurate information is being passed along. Most of the old days practitioners of the old Kwan are gone. They either quit a long time ago or they're died now. And I want this accurate information to be passed along. If you have any other questions as far as especially Changmoo-kwan, Kongdo-kwan, or Kwan history development, there's one guy who's still alive. That's Grandmaster Kim Pyong-soo. You can find him it's still teaching in Houston 6 days a week. Website is kimsookarate.com. And feel free to reach out to him. He was witness to development of the Kwan and development of what became Taekwondo through the 50s and 60s. So if you want firsthand information from someone that witnessed it, both in their Kwan, the Taekwondo reported for Black Belt magazine 1964-68, was witness to a lot of martial art development, was educated in Russian, English, Korean, and he had a camera, so he documented a lot of this history I talked about. Contact Grandmaster Kim Soo in Houston and interview him, ask him about it. Everyone have a great day. See you soon.